Good afternoon and welcome to today's Cuyahoga Arts and Culture information session. On behalf of my teammates, I thank you for tuning in. My name is Jill Paulson. I'm the Executive Director here at Cuyahoga Arts and Culture. As we do with all of our workshops, I do want to start today by acknowledging the land we are on and CAC's commitment to equity. I'll ask that my teammate drop that information into the chat, but you can also find it on our website, and do want to take a moment for that. Okay. Let's move to our aim today. Yeah, so you've tuned in. You probably wonder why. What can you learn? What are you going to hear? Our aim today is to share CAC facts with you, right? How we operate, what we do, who decides, what to expect in this next grant cycle. The session is focused on the current work of CAC, today's facts and what is, and how CAC is managing through our current operations in this levy period, the second levy that we'll refer to it as throughout today's conversation. This includes grants for 2024 and 2025. Today's session is not focused on the future levy and how that might play out, or the money and how that might be spent. Those are bigger conversations, and any planning for any potential future way of working through a new levy or any new money needs to happen at a grander scale. It needs to happen in a more inclusive way. It needs to happen in a way where every voice matters and it's not an info session, right? So I want you to know that going through today's conversation, and as we address the facts of CAC 101 and how grants are made, know that we're not forgetting what's to happen, what we could envision together, but that is big long-term work that we anticipate starting with all of you in the new year. Let's see, I think before now, let's slide on through to the next pieces, but you'll see there, you saw the information that we hope to cover, and it's really basic and straightforward. So we hope we get your questions answered. I also want to note that there's a place to put your questions in the Q&A spot, and I'll have my teammates reiterate that as we move forward. Just a little bit of background about Cuyahoga Arts and Culture. We know some of you know us well as longtime grant recipients. Others of you are new to CAC. We're the largest local funder of arts and culture in Cuyahoga County. We've been able to fund over $230 million to over 400 plus nonprofits since 2008 when we started, and some of you were there with us from the start. A very important but technical piece for everyone to understand on today's call, because this really does frame a lot of what we talk about as an agency, is that we are a political subdivision of the state of Ohio. You can check us out in the Ohio Revised Code. What this means is we're not quasi-governmental. We are our own unit of government. We're our own political subdivision. We're not city government. We're not county government. Think of us more like the metro parks or the library or the school district in your community. We're funded by Cuyahoga County residents, approved through a cigarette tax, which many of you worked hard to pass. Put there a little bit of history. In 2006, we had an approval rating of 56%, and last levy, 75%. That is the levy we're currently referring to as Levy 2, and that runs through January of 27. We did have a pre-question where someone sent in information asking, what is our mission? So it's right there: to inspire and strengthen the community by investing in culture. That means we make grants to nonprofits. Jake will talk more about this. There was also a question about our budget. So I want to make sure that I answer that. The question was, what was our budget last year? In 2022, our budget was $13.2 million. If you want to know more, you can always find our complete budget and the budget memo in our December board materials for the following year. And in every board packet, which we publish publicly, all of the board materials are there, including year-to-date spending against our budget. And then finally, once the year closes, we do encourage you to go to the Auditor of State's website to check out our full and complete audit. Again, want to be transparent and open. That's how you find our financials, and that's how you can see what we're doing. So that's a little bit of background to frame where we're headed today. Now, obviously, CAC is more than just Ohio Revised Code. We're people, right? And I want to call out the 5 board members that serve on our organization: President Nancy Mendez, Vice President Dr. Michelle Scott Taylor, Carolyn Eisenhart serves as secretary, and Dan Blakemore and Charna Sherman are our other 2 trustees. You see my teammates here. We have a staff of 7, several of whom are here on this call, and you'll hear from later, so I'll let them introduce themselves. But that's CAC. And today's session really is a staff-led and driven conversation and sharing of information about the operations. So let's move to the next one. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to my teammate Jake to ground us a little bit more before we head into the details of how we make our grants, who decides, and the like. Jake.
Thank you, Jill. I'm Jake Sinatra, Director of Grant Making Strategy and Communications at CAC. Glad to be with you today to share some information and answer questions that you might have about CAC. As a reminder, you can drop your questions into the Q&A, the question and answer feature here on Zoom. We'll address those as we move through the conversation today, or come back to at the end of the presentation. We have time held for question and answers. So as we set the stage for today's session, I just want to take a moment to share about the Cuyahoga Voices and Vision listening project that really grounds us in the why of CAC's grant making. In 2016 and 2017, following the successful renewal of CAC's tax resource, we carried out a robust community listening tour and planning process that was integral in shaping our second decade, which is the Levy 2 that we are now moving through. The photo here is a screenshot from our website, where all of this work is documented at future.cacgrants.org. And we encourage you, if you haven't seen it before, to take a look and see what it's all about. You'll see, in addition to lots of stories and feedback from Cuyahoga County residents, it's a clear call for CAC to prioritize equity in our own work and to ensure that we're not only fully supporting our first audience, the nonprofits that we fund, but our second audience, which is all of the Cuyahoga County residents. So with that, we'll dive into a core question for today. What does CAC do? We make grants to 501c3 nonprofit organizations in Cuyahoga County who produce, present, or create arts and cultural programs for the public. A few people today submitted this question in advance, asking, if I'm not a nonprofit, can I receive CAC funding? Can I use a fiscal sponsor? No, unfortunately, we only fund nonprofits, but fortunately, that's a huge cross-section of our arts and cultural community that we're really proud to invest in. So by law, CAC is created to fund nonprofits, and we do just that. We don't fund individuals, we don't fund fiscal sponsors or other types of entities, just nonprofits. That said, we of course recognize there's many other people and entities and organizations that make up our creative community. So we also do invest in nonprofits that support resident-led and arts projects, artists, of course, who are working in our community, and we'll touch on that more in a bit. But first, how do we get our taxpayer funds out into the community? We have 3 core grants: general operating support, project support, and cultural heritage. They're listed here in priority order from a dollar investment standpoint, as set forth by our policies, which are available on our website at cacgrants.org. These policies are set by our board and state that our funding priorities are first, general operating support, followed by project support, then other initiatives. The vast majority of CAC funding goes out in the form of operating support grants to our nonprofit arts community. So that is CAC and what we do. And so for a little bit more on each of these core grant making areas, I'll turn it over to my teammates. Firstly is Julia with general operating support.
Hi everyone, I'm Julia. I'm a grants manager here at CAC. With general operating support, the goal is to strengthen the community by deepening its access to arts and culture through meaningful multi-year core support to arts and cultural organizations based in and serving Cuyahoga County. In 2023, there are 68 organizations that received this grant, with grant sizes varying from $14,000 to $1.1 million. Here's a list of the 2023 general operating support grant recipients. So these are all Cuyahoga County-based organizations with a primary mission to produce arts and cultural programming for the public. The Ohio Revised Code defines arts and culture to include the natural sciences. And so the piece I'll point out here is that this certainly includes organizations like Doan Brook Watershed, the Botanical Gardens, and Lake Erie Nature Center. Those all fall under our definition of arts and culture. GOS grants are determined using a formula that we inherited from the Ohio Arts Council. It considers an organization's unrestricted operating revenue from the past 3 years in the context of the whole pool of approved grantees. There's no application score or merit-based component as part of the formula. CAC needs financial data from all of the applicants in a pool before we can calculate grants, because that whole set of data contributes to each organization's grant amount. In the past few weeks, we've compiled this data that we need to make close estimates on 2024 grant amounts, and all of the 2024 grantees have been contacted in the last few weeks with that update. Official recommended grant amounts are going to be shared later this week ahead of next week's board meeting on November 15th. So I'll pass it now to Maya, who's going to talk about project support.
Thank you, Julia. Hi, my name is Maya Curtis. I am a grants manager here at Cuyahoga Arts and Culture and part of the grants management team. I lead our project support grant work, and the purpose of the project support grant is to promote public access and encourage the breadth of arts and cultural programming in our community by supporting Cuyahoga County-based projects. In 2023, 192 nonprofit organizations were the recipient of a project support grant. And we distributed project support grants that totaled over $1.3 million, and grant sizes ranged from 1,056 to 18,730. And here we have a list of our 2023 project support grantees. Our projects range greatly in the size of projects, locations throughout Cuyahoga County, and the communities served. Projects must be arts or cultural activities with a public arts and culture component. We fund a variety of nonprofit organizations, as you can see, from Lakewood Young Filmmakers Academy, who holds a summer filmmaking workshop that's led by industry professionals that teaches high school students screenwriting, set design, acting, as well as how to produce, shoot, and edit their own short films. To Hospice of the Western Reserves Project, the Healing Arts Program, which offers diverse opportunities for grieving people to access art therapy. They hire board-certified art therapists to facilitate discussions and help participants understand grief. They practice methods to help them cope and connect with others and begin to heal. And those are just a couple of examples. Obviously, we have 192 grantees listed here are doing 192 amazing, wonderful projects throughout Cuyahoga County. And I'm going to turn it over to Devon.
Hello, everybody. My name is Davon Nichols, and I am the grants manager for Cuyahoga Arts and Culture Cultural Heritage Grant. The purpose of the Cultural Heritage Grant is to support and strengthen the community by providing flexible support to organizations that are representative of culturally specific population. Last year, we had a total of 12 organizations that were recipients to this grant, totaling $219,703. Within this budget, organizations had the opportunity to receive a grant amount between the minimum of $5,000 and a maximum of $30,000. With that, let's see who the 2023 Cultural Heritage Grant recipients are. So as you can see from the 12 grant recipients from last year, these are the ones who were awarded. And I wanted to take a moment to highlight Duffy Liturgical Dance Ensemble organization. They are having a performance at the year end for their year for Cleveland Museum of Art this Sunday at 3 p.m. And there's also, outside of dance, you have organizations working culturally with their organizations and constituents, such as Julia de Burgos, with programs stemming from art creation to agencies that help with younger minors move in different obstacles with professional development, modeling, and expression of their needs.
Thank you, Davon. As I mentioned, we also make important investments in nonprofits who support resident-led arts and culture projects and artists working in Cuyahoga County. So I wanted to make sure that we acknowledge that we've made grants to more than 30 different nonprofits doing this work over the past 5 or 6 years. And we plan to work with Neighborhood Connections, IOB, and Assembly to continue these efforts in the year ahead. Another question we had submitted, how can we designate more funding to individual artists? We know that the needs are great, right? Everyone we support lets us know that they would like more funding. And so we'll definitely come back to that in this presentation to share what's underway as far as future funding efforts. But I really want to make sure that we recognize the important work of these 3 organizations that are able to go beyond CAC's structure of funding nonprofits to ensure we're getting support and funding to our broader creative economy. On the next slide here, I want to quickly share our annual grant making timeline. At least one person has submitted a question, when is your next grant deadline? I want to apply. So that's great. And our grant making cycle is annual. It follows the calendar year. We absolutely want to get you plugged in if you're interested in funding in the future. So just briefly here, our board approves grant guidelines in April, setting forth our plan for the year. Applications open in May with an initial deadline in June to confirm eligibility. Some grants are on a 2-year cycle and others are eligible to skip the full application and panel review processes based on the number of years they've been funded, but we verify all grantees' eligibility to receive public funds every year. In September, our public panel processes take place, more on that in a moment. And in November, and in a week from today for this year, we'll announce the next year's grants. Our team works year-round with our nearly 300 grantees to help them navigate and succeed in this process. Applicants have a high success rate. We do our best to provide high quality customer service to every one of our applicants and to our grantees. So if you're interested in funding for 2025, please reach out to me or anyone on the screen here today, and we'll be sure to get you plugged in. So who evaluates applications at CAC? The faces you see here represent some of our 2024 panelists. This is a broad and diverse cross-section of experts from across the nation who have been trained in CAC's grant-making process and criteria. One person has asked, what are their qualifications? How are they screened for relevant experience? These folks are nonprofit directors, museum professionals, educators, working artists and musicians, theater makers and designers, CEOs of arts advocacy organizations, and leaders in the fields of arts administration, grant making, and racial equity. This is a vast oversimplification of their broad and deep experience in the arts and culture space, and we really encourage you to visit our website, cacgrants.org/panel. There you can read their biographies in full and learn more about our panel process. Our team works very diligently to vet, interview, and engage panelists who are qualified to assess applications against CAC's funding criteria. These folks are volunteers and receive a small stipend for their time. It's also important to know that their work is conducted in public, now typically via virtual meetings like this one, and their comments and feedback all become available to the participants, to applicants, and to the public. This process has been a hallmark of CAC's decision-making for over 15 years, and it continues to ensure we're stewarding our public resource carefully and impartially. And we welcome your panelist nominations as we plan for future grant cycles. Please reach out to our team if you have recommendations. With that, I'll turn it back to Jill.
Pardon, sorry there. This is a question on everyone's mind, right? Who has the authority to approve CAC grants? And the answer is really simple. It's our board. They are the only ones who can approve grants, and they must do it in public. The other piece that lots of people have had questions about over the last couple of years, but in particular something that we've tried to clarify more in recent months, is how do we determine our total annual grant making? Now, you've heard us use the word allocation, right? But I think an allocation you could simply define for CAC as adding up all the individual grants and the grants in each area, and that becomes the allocation for the year. It starts by saying, let's look at our revenue. Let's look at the policies that our board set, which Jake walked us through earlier. I'd call your attention to our allocation policy and also our general fund policy. We have those are our board defined priorities that we work from. And from that, we write and work through guidelines. So again, our annual grant making is based on the amount of uncommitted funds that we have at any one time, revenue projections into the near future, defined board priorities as they are expressed in the grant guidelines for each year. So every month we receive our revenue from the state, and each month we true up our projections to try to get as close as possible to what we think we can do for the next year. Our aim is always to get the most money out into community as possible, while also trying to make sure that folks don't drop off a cliff. If we were to give all the money right now, next year, there wouldn't be any to give away, and it'd be pretty dire, right? So this is an ongoing process. In April of this year, our board approved the guidelines, which Jake mentioned. I call that out because that is really where the policies play out, right? When our board said they want to support operating support, cultural heritage, and project support, they indicated maximum grant amounts, the formulas we would use, how the programs would be run, and that we aim and endeavor to have commitments the same for years 24 and 25, in particular for operating support and cultural heritage. So that was the moment back in April when our board set the trajectory for our work for the next 2 years. At our September board meeting, our board discussed in public several scenarios for how we might approach our grant making for the next 2 years. And I'm going to pause and say, remember, this is working a plan and a strategy that launched in our Creative Voices and Vision community planning that we've committed to, where we say that groups want as steady or consistent rather funding as possible, recognizing that revenue is going down. So we're doing whatever we can to get the most money out as possible. The board discussed in public. A question came in that said, how did the public feed into that discussion? And I think it's important to really clarify the scenarios the board looked at were all the result of community feedback, of this team right here dealing daily with all of our grant recipients, of the community listening we've had over the recent years, of hearing from people about how they want money at this point in time. Does everyone love it? Not always, right? But we're planning for the future, and there are opportunities for new ways to do things. But right now we're working the plan, and the board decided and moved forward with a path for CAC, an approach that would allow us to plan for consistent grant making again in 24 and 25, helping us close out what we hope is the end of Levy 2. Jake already mentioned the grant amounts, and so we'll let that move forward, but that is where our board will have the opportunity to approve those grants. To clarify, because a lot of you are probably more interested in artist grants that go to our nonprofit partners or the IOB and Neighborhood Connections, those grants have traditionally and will be determined or presented to our board for them to vote on in December. This is a chart that we're all very familiar with, but I think it's very important context. We have 50% of the revenue as we did at the start, and we have ever more increasing organizations and people who want a piece of it, which is understandable. This is public money, right? But I want you to understand the context within which we are operating. 50% less revenue means smaller grants across the board. We also did hope at one point that that revenue would plateau, right? And we're saying that from a grant making perspective. I want to pause and be explicitly clear, because our funding comes from cigarette tax. We absolutely want fewer smokers in our community, right? This is a public health win when we have that. But that leads to some bigger, longer, ongoing conversations about what next. But I do want to say, CAC and our arts partners value public health, and we want to see smoking go down. But the reality is it does mean less revenue for us to distribute. Okay. Our current grant making this year, just to give you some context, as you heard Julia, Devon, and Maya walk through our 3 primary grant areas, is about 12.4 million this year. And it's all been accounted for. To that earlier question, you can find it all in our financials, in all of our board materials, and you see the plan for that in our budget the previous year. Where are we headed? Again, leading back to that conversation and discussion our board had at its September meeting, they said they wanted to hold grant making as steady as possible, consistent across 24 and 25. Right now, we're looking at about 11.3 million. And we'll see how that plays out. But the recommendations, again, go to the board in the next month. And then again for our other grant areas in December. Okay. I think a key piece that many people come to this conversation thinking about is, well, Aren't we going to get a new levy? Aren't we trying to have more money? And I think the answer to all of that is yes. And the answer to all of that is, aren't we so glad we get to work with Assembly on this? And they're leading the charge in that advocacy through both their C3 and their C4, right? But right now, we can only make grants on the money that we have. And so we can't plan for this 24-25 with anticipated money, with hope, or even with an endowment, which we can't have as a government, right? That's for foundations. So we need to plan for what is possible now. So let's just think positively and plan and anticipate that a levy is successful in the next year or so. If that were to happen, it would still take another 6 months or so to have the dollars come to CAC and for them to be substantial enough for us to give back out. So that's why I think, while technical, it's an important piece to understand as those of you coming here looking to influence and really participate in that levy 3 and how those dollars are distributed. We're talking about 26 and 27. And those are the dollars and the opportunity for us as a community to say, we're different than we were in 2007. What needs funding, who needs funding, and how are we going to do that as a community? And those are community conversations. But again, not for the next 2 years because that money isn't yet here. And as always, we do want to give a shout out to Assembly and all the good work they do. So if you haven't already, please make sure you become a member, go to their website, sign up, make sure you're going to their assemblies to stay in touch. We're working hand in hand, and we know we can't be successful unless our two organizations aren't really in lockstep working with all of you. So I think at this point, Jake, do you want to turn, is that good for Q&A? I know we've got some in the mix. Do you want to get us going with them?
Sure, yeah, I'd be glad to. And as we've mentioned, if you've joined us more recently, you can submit any questions that you have to us through the Q&A feature in Zoom, and we'll do our best to get to as many questions as we can here in our time remaining. We also invited folks to submit questions in advance of the session today, so we're going to start with a couple of those, and then we'll continue with questions as they come in. So please go ahead and submit your questions. A first question that came in was, how can we get art and education grants through your organization? And I think that's one that Maya on our grant making team can speak to.
Yeah, definitely. So we have many organizations that are working in arts education, and project support grants are always your first stop when you are looking into applying for a grant with Cuyahoga Arts and Culture. Before general operating support or before cultural heritage grant, you must receive a project support grant. And as Jake mentioned, our timeline for grant making opens up with eligibility in June. And I'm happy to talk with anyone earlier than that and hear more about what you're working on and what you're interested in doing. So I'll go ahead and put my email in the chat, and feel free to reach out to me directly with any questions, and we can set up a time to talk. All of our emails are available online, but yeah, reach out to any of us, but I'll put mine in specifically. Thanks, Jake.
Thank you, Maya. A next question we had was around creative businesses and funding versus nonprofits or creative businesses that also have a nonprofit arm. It sounds like this is someone who's kind of straddling the world of creative business and nonprofit. And so we also want to, again, give a plug for our partner in Assembly for the Arts, who's working with the broader creative economy and creative businesses. We encourage you to contact their team and get plugged in. We also, if you do have a 501c3 nonprofit, we'll be happy to learn more about what you're working on and to see if CAC funding is a fit for you. So thank you for submitting that question. A next question that we had was, how can artists be represented in all decision-making and policies at CAC? Do you want to speak to that, Jill, or would you like me to?
Sure, I can speak to that. I think it dovetails to another question or two that are in the chat as well. And the answer is, CAC is established to fund nonprofits. Nonprofits are run primarily by artists. Right now, the groups that we fund are employing over 8,000 artists, right? So we don't want to forget that point. And every time we meet with organizations, be they volunteer run or large institutions, they want us to relay that they are employing artists with benefits. Now, is that where you're going with your question? Maybe not, right? I think the other way to say is, Jake, talk about panelists. Let's get panelists there. And then to the other question is there a practicing artist on our board? At this point, there have been in the past, and folks know who they are, from rock and rollers to visual artists, other musicians and the like. At this point, I do not believe, but I would let each board member define for themselves. We definitely have arts administrators, but again, point back to CAC does not appoint our board. That's a discussion and a decision for the county, both council and the executive.
Thanks, Jill.
Mhm.
We also had some folks who are looking for information on grants for individual artists working on community projects, and others who want to do collaborations with international artists and want to get connected with resources. And so to both of those questions, again, I plug our partner in Assembly, assemblycle.org, I believe is their website. We also have opportunities through IOB and Neighborhood Connections, which you can find more information about on our website, or please reach out to us with questions. And then another great opportunity is our clevelandartsevents.com website. If you're not familiar with that platform, it's a website that we run and manage at CAC in coordination with the folks at Assembly for the Arts. And this is chock full of resources, both for our nonprofit grantees as well as for artists in the community. There's an artist directory there. There's an opportunities page, as you can see. There's also resources regarding grant making and opportunities as well. So that's a great starting point if you're looking to get plugged in or connected to the vibrant arts community in our scene. Great. We had one technical question from a potential grantee, I believe, who is asking how long after November 15th does an organization receive funding? This is a pretty important question, right? If you're anticipating a grant next week. So our grants are recommended to our board for approval next Wednesday, right around this time. And after that announcement is complete, we will do some onboarding with our new grantees. We'll have our grant agreements signed through the end of the year, and our grant cycle is the calendar year of 2024 for 2024 grants. And so that funding can be distributed starting early in 2024. And so we'll share all of that in much more detail with any of our grantees. But if you're curious, 2024 grants are for expenses incurred in the 2024 grant year. So we'll be in touch with more information after our grants announcements next week.
Hey, can I jump in?
Yeah,
and maybe
absolutely.
see there's a couple more. Julia, do you want to tackle the question related to the operating support program?
Yeah.
Sure. There's a question in here about what I mentioned with GOS formula not being merit-based. To specify, the funding formula and the way that we calculate grant amounts has no merit-based component. That said, every 2 years, CAC accepts applications to the General Operating Support Grant Program, and that's a rigorous eligibility check and application that does have a merit-based component to whether that organization is approved into, or rather recommended to join the pool. So merit does certainly have much to do with whether an organization can join. Those applications are reviewed based on our funding criteria, which leads with public benefit, artistic and cultural vibrancy, and organizational capacity. But once you're in, that number, that score doesn't have to do with your grant amount, nor does financial need as a concept. It's based on your organization's budget size, rather your revenue size within the context of the whole pool of general operating support grantees. Yeah.
Thanks, Julia. There was another question here about the levy or potential for future funding. So just wanted to address if the levy perchance is deferred. We have a recommendation from strategists that suggests November 2024 could be a potential timeline for a renewal or increase of the existing levy. If it happened to be delayed for some instance, how does that affect our grant making? How does that affect our work?
We will see significant decrease in our grants. Our plan moving forward is dependent on a successful levy that both will allow us to live past January 2027, but that'll also hopefully, at least for a few years, allow us to have more money in the community, right? We know that the source is always going to go down over time, but this is our aim. So yes, to be clear, really helpful question. We are banking on a unified community that in a year or so can come together to move forward a levy that is successful. And from there, again, it opens up a lot of possibilities. I do want to speak to some of you who are interested more in the focus on individual artists, and I hope you hear loud and clear in our message today. We're planning to work with Assembly next year. They finished some listening that I think went well, and we're ready to learn more. They'll be bringing a proposal to our board in December that then would take forward and plan how they will distribute and oversee artist grant making or artist grants and programming in 2024. How they choose to do that, that's up to them. So we're really putting it in their hands and trusting that those of you who are artists really weigh in on their process and support them as we look to expand funding for artists. Now, I can't commit to anything. Again, as you saw that slide, who decides? The board decides. But I also believe that there is a strong appetite to acknowledge the important role that artists have in our community, and that needs to be discussed independent of nonprofits moving into a future levy. So again, hear that. CAC, as we said, acknowledges that 15 years ago, our community was one way and the needs of our community might be different in the future. So the only reason you sense a little hesitation in my voice is because as staff, we can't commit, but know that those are ongoing conversations and we hear you as individual artists, as creatives, either working in the nonprofits we fund or those of you who are working outside of those structures. So wanted to tackle that. Jake, does this maybe flow into some of the other questions that are related to budget or the like?
Sure, but before we go there, just one technical one that I think we can get out of the way for the grants team. There's a question, how many years behind a nonprofit organization is needed or required to receive a grant? Could someone on the grants team maybe speak to the minimum requirements there?
Sure. An organization needs to be have a permanent and viable base in Cuyahoga County at least 1 year ahead of the eligibility check, which I imagine the deadline next year will be similar to this year towards the end of May. And so an organization also needs to be a 501c3 nonprofit at the time that they submit their eligibility check and be registered to do business in the state of Ohio at that time as well.
Thank you, Julia. Just looking over our,
Yes.
there's another technical question here with regards to the levy that's asking, will there be a structure for vapes or other forms of smoking, following on the heels of an important passage, I think, for marijuana, as we know yesterday. How does that all relate to CAC? Jill, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. So CAC has the ability right now to tax two things: property tax, which our community has chosen not to go down that path, and cigarettes, 30 cents a pack currently at this point. Now, what you're referring to, right, is the good advocacy work that happened in community through Assembly and CAC to help us lift that cap at the end of last year. So right now we are still taxing cigarettes at 30 cents a pack, but we have the possibility of going back at a higher amount, yet to be determined. But those are the two avenues we have right now. I know people mentioned marijuana and everything that unfolded last night with the election, but that is, I think, a discussion to be had in another call and another conversation at a broader level. Everyone has their eye on that. And as you know, there are plenty of other entities that are lining up for that. I think it's also clear to say we're just at this point not permitted to do anything else legally. So we got to stay in this current lane, but it doesn't mean we're not going to work with Assembly to find additional dollars that even if they don't flow through CAC, they can come to our community, because that's an important goal.
There's a question here, Jill, about missing funds. So I just want to be direct and candid and bring folks questions. How,
Sure.
How is CAC going to address missing funds for the arts?
Yeah. No, I appreciate that open, honest question. The honest answer is there are no missing funds. You may be referring to funds that at one point were anticipated or budgeted, but we often don't spend all the money that we budget. And sometimes it's for reasons because a funding partner isn't ready. And in this case, again, I'm sure you might be mentioning the artist funding. There's a long history there, but when we were in 2017, our funding partner was not able to move forward. We decided to pause and redesign a program. So those dollars did not go out. They're not missing, they did not go out. They stayed in the general fund, and we continued to use them throughout our tenure and our 10-year plan for how we distribute dollars. So again, I refer to all of our financials. They track at every moment in time how dollars are spent. When dollars aren't spent, they stay in unencumbered dollars, and then we use those for the following years. So frankly, when money isn't spent, we're able to factor it in to upcoming grant making budgets. And so when dollars are not spent, we're able to keep operating support steady for 6 years. And those were decisions our board made during the pandemic. Now moving forward, we'll see what our board makes decisions in the future, but I really want to clarify, there is no missing money. There just might be money that people wish went other places than it did. I'll give two other examples. During the pandemic, we budgeted substantial dollars for project support. A substantial amount of organizations had to cancel their grants. They had other things to do. They needed to take care of their families. They needed to run their organizations. They needed to not take on one arts project that frankly couldn't probably even be carried out during the pandemic. Those dollars were not spent. They didn't disappear. They're not missing. They remained in the general fund, and we use them in the future to create our financial models for the following year across all grant areas. I'd say the same thing with staff, right? If we have a staff opening, and my team won't probably like to hear this, but if we have an opening, we don't just take that money we're not spending and divvy it up among everyone else, because that's what we budgeted, right? So I know it's a touchy subject. I don't want to be glib, but the money is accounted for. It is sometimes not spent, even though it's budgeted, right? And I think what I hear from you all is, how do we continue to be more clear in the future in articulating that to all of you, because we want you to know exactly what's happening.
Thanks, Jill. Another question just with regarding individual artists funding, I believe, is there anything for individual artists? I know I mentioned earlier in the presentation, CAC exists to fund nonprofit arts and cultural organizations in the county. However, we do invest in a number of current organizations who have already made their decisions on funding for artists this year. We encourage you to connect with them, of course, about potential future opportunities, because I know they have them outside of CAC. Those are Caramoo House, Julio de Burgos Cultural Arts Center spaces, and then lastly, Assembly for the Arts. And we are working with Assembly for the Arts going forward to make a plan for individual artists funding and opportunities in 2024 and beyond. So that is who I would refer you to with regards to individual artist opportunities, as well as our Cleveland Arts Events website. Is there anything else that folks would add there?
I might also add, it's not our program at all, but we are colleagues at the city, and some of you on this call are actually on that committee, right? There'll be some amazing opportunities coming up in the new year through the city with the ARPA dollars. My understanding is they are putting artists front and center in that work. So if you have questions, go to the city, ask Rhonda Brown. She'll be able to provide more detail, or any of the folks on that Arts Transformation Committee. But I know there's a real focus there in centering artists and the important work they do. So stay tuned. That's some real money.
Great.
What about, Jake, can we jump in? And there's a question about our total grants that we award each year in our operating budget.
Thank you.
And the ratio, right? So sometimes people are getting at, what's your overhead? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Our overhead right now is about 9%, substantially below what most nonprofits should be operating at. So we're not a nonprofit, but just being very clear, we give out about 91% of our dollars right now to grants directly to the nonprofits that we fund. Side note, our budget is $500,000 less than what we had anticipated in programming and planning a couple of years ago. It's just not the time for us to grow. We're a staff of 7, and this is where we're at. So want to be sensitive to that question, but hopefully that gets at where that question was going.
Sure.
Maybe I can also add at this point to just the way the numbers go, we're actually receiving smaller tax receipts every year than we are giving out in grants, right? That's why we have to work and use our general fund. But next year, we'll be making more grants than the dollars will actually come in new revenue.
Yes, I don't know if you want to speak to that anymore, Joe. We had another question just about how much money has gone to the general fund. Each year. I know that that's accounted for in a lot of CAC's financial documentation that's shared in our board materials. But is there anything else that you'd like to just in response to that question?
And I want to make sure, because sometimes we're all using different terms, but when we say general fund, maybe some people call it reserve, but we're really trying to be clear now as we move forward. Governments have general funds. We have one funding source. We have 2 places where it's invested, but you'll see in all of our board packets and materials, that's all one fund. So I'm trying to find the specific question there, but we use it every year to balance our budget to make sure, as I just mentioned, if we have only $8 to $9 million coming in tax receipts this year, we're making more grants than that. Well, we have to use our general fund to make sure we can get those commitments out the door. Is that clear? I'm going to pause and ask maybe if anyone else on my team would like to add to that, or if you feel like that question was answered.
I think it's just important to note that we've consistently used this process of using our general fund to make our grant commitments, because CAC has to have money in the bank in order to make its grants. And that's just an important difference. We can't make grants on anticipated revenues or money that we haven't collected. Our collections come in once each month. And so we have to have the money in the bank in order to make the grants each year, as we get ready to do next week.
If I can add one more thing too, it is important, again, as we go back to that idea of CAC as a government, not quasi-governmental, not county, not city, but we must have a balanced budget. And so this is how we have to work and use that general fund to make sure we're able to do such. So just a different rule and a different way of operating and set of guidelines and rules than many of you have as individuals or as people at nonprofits.
Mm-hmm. Another question we had come in is Assembly for the Arts funded by CAC fully or partially?
Yes, and I want to turn maybe to a couple of teammates if I'm putting you on the spot, but my sense is in 2023, they received 3 grants from CAC, operating support, a support for artists grant, and now this planning grant. That said, we're just one slice of their funding. I don't know if someone else who works more directly with them, but I know they're on this call. They work hard to raise a lot more money, primarily at this point from other local foundations.
But yes, CAC has been a longtime supporter of Assembly and its predecessor organizations. And we work closely together. Any other questions? Let me see here. Feel free to submit in the Q&A. When was the last time money was held over from a cycle to add to the general fund? That's going back to just
so there isn't all the money is in the general fund. There's not money moving from one place to another. So that idea of rolling over, the money is there. Right. So if you saw in past materials or something where there was a reference to rolling over, that's probably not an appropriate, we probably should have used more clear language. And again, I move back to, if you're referring again to what happened in 2017, 18, or 19, look at who was on the board. The board makes decisions in public. We'll be as clear and open as we can. And without totally dismissing it, I do want us to focus on moving forward. We have a really great partner. We had amazing artist partners this year. Next year, Assembly is planning to do great work. And we will make sure that we keep that commitment to them and to artists. So there's not money in a fund that's not just the bank. It's the general fund. Does that...
Yeah, I think the clarification was just like, when was the last time money was held over, given that next year we're awarding more than that we will take in, and I think.
Yeah, thank you, please.
Yeah, I think that's just an accounting and timing question more so than it is. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
You want to give people a moment to add more, or my teammates, is there more you want to add, something you heard that you feel like you want to make clear? I'm just sorry, as we pause here, just trying to catch everything. How many people are on this Zoom? Looks like about 53, inclusive of all of our teams. So thank you all for making time. Do we ever recommend board members to the county executive? Sure, we always give the county executive information when they ask, but sometimes they'll just put, they'll name who they name. Really, that is the county executive nominates, council approves. There are plenty of board members, or several board members we have now, we had nothing to do with. Some we did recommend, but I will say it usually comes less in the form of a strong recommendation because we know that's not our authority. And it comes more in cross-checking when the county comes back to us with names that says, does this person have a conflict of interest? Because there was a reminder, our board members cannot be grant recipients. They can't work for or be on the boards of any of the organizations we fund, right? So, and that is a state ethics situation. It's not a CAC and for, you know, a CAC issue. That's Ohio state ethics policy. So I hope that gets at that question, right? Anyone can recommend folks. And in fact, when I've been on a commission before, you can apply yourself. I'm trying to think, did we get through everything else?
There's one that just came in just about who decides what individuals serve on the evaluation team and how does your evaluation team reflect diversity? It's a great question. Individuals are identified in a myriad ways, and that's by public nominations. We accept nominations. We also do outreach every year. We post a public call for panelists to serve in our process. And because we've been doing this for a while, right, we have some folks who have come back, who've rolled on and off of our panel service over the years. And they also recommend their peers and other qualified folks to us who we vet, interview, and identify to be qualified for service on our panel. With regard to diversity, that's always something we pay very close attention to, and you'll see in each November's board materials, we share a memo that includes the biographies of all the panelists, as well as their breakdown by race, age, gender, and disability status in more recent years. And so we make sure that that cohort is diverse in both artistic and management expertise, race, ethnicity, gender, and age, to make sure that the cohort is diverse in many aspects. So that's important. Let's see.
There looks like there's a question where someone said, is there a process for grantees to indicate that they won't be using money so that it can be used in the future for other things? The program grants team knows more about that than I do.
Yeah, we do have this happen from time to time. And so if groups have changes to their project at all, they're in conversation with any of our grants managers. So there's a variety of situations in this vein. I invite anyone else on the grants team if they want to chime in, but they can let us know. We're in regular communication with folks. And if folks withdraw their grant, that money also would return to the general fund for use in other ways.
It looks like of all the questions that are questions, have we answered most of them? Or all of them? I'm trying to go through.
Yeah, I believe
there's some commentary, right? But as far as what we have here for questions and adding to a positive, productive, forward-looking conversation, do we have more? Please double check.
Yeah, I'm looking here. I'm again also inviting folks, as you can see on our slide. We understand questions sometimes come up after you step away from a session like this, and so we really want to invite you to be in conversation with us directly. You can visit cacgrants.org/staff to find all of our contact information. Our phone number is there. We do want to hear from you and be in conversation with you to make sure that you have clarity about the work that we're doing to invest this public resource into our community. So please don't hesitate to reach out to anyone on our grant making team, to Jill or to myself. We're here to be in service to you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jill. Anything else in closing then? I don't see any other. Thank you all for your time and attention today.